today we are going to discuss about unit 1. Okay, so the entire revision. So these are the topics that we are covering here: accuracy, precision, primary and secondary standard solutions, significant figures, error types and minimizations, quantitative and qualitative analysis methods, and different standardizations of different solutions. Okay. The first one is precision and accuracy. So here this precision and accuracy are very much important validation parameters. So why? Because we are validating a procedure, we are validating an instrument, or we are validating a personnel based on these two parameters. Okay, precision and accuracy. Okay, so in which precision is giving about, it is telling about the consistency, how the person is consistent, how the instrument is consistently giving the values, and accuracy is telling about the correctness. So how the instrument is correctly giving the values. Okay, how close these values to the true value, that will be discussed in the accuracy part. Definition of precision. So here the precision is a degree in which repeated measurements show same result. Okay, so that means we are giving many values, so all values must be very close. Okay, so this is very much important. Here we can see on the screen, so these are the values that we can get higher precision. So why? Because all values are very close together. Okay, so that's why precision is also called as repeatability. Precision is also called as repeatability. So we are getting the repeatable values, we are getting the same values again and again. Okay, so that's called to be a precision, so which gives the consistency of the process. And the second one is accuracy. So accuracy means here the degree of closeness of measurements of a quantity to actual value. So for example, so we are studying for the final exams, so we need to get 100 marks. So if you are getting 90 marks, so that means you are having more accuracy. So if you get 60 marks, that means you are having less accuracy. So that means it is very close to the true value, right? So here we can see on the screen. So this is the picture which will be representing accuracy. So here all the values are very close to the true value, so which is there in the middle part. This is the target that we need to achieve. So here all values are very close to true value. So that's why, so this system is having highest accuracy. Okay, so these are the two important parameters, so which are very much important in pharmaceutical analysis. So why? Because we are measuring many, we are taking many samples, we are doing many experiments, and we are getting results, and those results must be producing precision and accuracy. So then only we can trust those values. Okay, so if they are completely deviated from the precision and accuracy, so that means we are getting many errors. Right, so accuracy is inversely proportional to errors. If more accuracy is there, less number of errors are produced. If more errors are there, less accuracy is produced. So here we can see the 4 scenarios where accuracy and precision that we can see easily observably, right? The first one is high accuracy and high precision. So here we can see, so these are the values which are very close to the target, so that's why it is having higher accuracy. And all repeatable values are coming in the same region. So that means, so this system is also producing high precision. And the second case is low accuracy. So why? Because here we are getting few values. So these are so very far from the true value. So why? Because true value is there in the middle. Okay. So it is very far from the true value. So, but here all values are coming to the same place. So that means here it is producing high precision, but it is not producing accuracy. So it is having a low accurate and high precision values. The third scenario, high accuracy and low precision. So here high accuracy that we can see here. So that means all values are very close to the true value, which is there in the middle. And low precision, that means all values are dispersed, which are not having the consistency, which are dispersed. So here these values are dispersed. So that's why this is a low precision. And the fourth scenario, low accuracy. So why? Because here we can see all the values are dispersed, so not at the true region area. So that's why it is producing low accuracy and low precision. Why? Because all values are not giving the consistent values. All values are not giving repeatable values. Okay, these are not close to each other. So that's why here it is producing low precision values. The next one is molarity and normality. So these are the two important metrics or units, so which are used to measure concentration of the solutions. Okay, molarity and normality. What is the definition of molarity? Molarity is the number of moles of solute dissolved per 1 liter of solution, right? So here we can see the formula. So that is M equals to number of moles of the solute, so which is dissolved in 1 liter of solution. So here important thing is 1 liter of solution. Always molar and normal solutions are prepared for 1 liter of solution. So that is important point we need to remember. The next one is normality. So normality is defined as the equivalent weight. So here we are considering equivalent weight of the solution dissolved per 1 liter of solution, right? So what is the difference between molarity and normality? In molarity, so we are taking molecular weight. In normality, we are taking equivalent weight. So that is the main important difference. And what is the common in these two metrics? So here in these two metrics, one common thing is there that so both solutions are prepared for 1 liter solution, 1 liter of solvent, right? So that's why 1 liter is used here. But here in molarity, so we are taking molecular weight of the compound, and here we are taking equivalent weight of the compound. So this is the formula for normality. So normality equals to gram equivalent weight of solute, so which is dissolved in 1 liter of solution, right? So this is the formula for normality. So but how can we calculate gram equivalent weight? So this is the formula for gram equivalent weight calculation. Gram equivalent weight equals to molecular weight or molar mass divided by N, right? So for example, if you take NaOH, so NaOH is having molecular weight is 40 and the valency will be 1. So 40 by 1, that is 40. So equivalent weight of NaOH is 40. Example, 80 grams of NaOH in 400 ml solution. So we have added 80 grams of NaOH and which is dissolving 400 of solution, not in 1000 ml. We are adding in 400 ml solution. Then what is the molarity of that particular solution? So we know that molarity, to calculate the molarity, we need two important things. So first one is moles and the second one is volume, right? But here moles is not given. So we need to calculate the moles. So how will you calculate the moles? So mole of NaOH, which is equals to weight by molecular weight. So what is the weight here? 80 grams that we have taken. Okay, 80 gram of NaOH. So that is weight for 80 grams and divided by 40. So what is 40? 40 is the molecular weight of NaOH. So that's why we can take 80 by 40. So that gives 2 moles. Now we have to take the volume of the solution, but we have not prepared for 1000 ml. We are preparing for 400 ml, right? So that's why 400 by 1000. So that gives 0.4 liters. So that means we are converting the ml solution into liters. Okay, so 400 ml. So that equals to 0.4 liters. How do we get this one? 400 by 1000, right? So finally, we can calculate the molarity. So which is equals to moles, number of moles divided by 1 liter. So here we have, we are getting 2 moles. That's why 2 divided by liter. So that is 0.4 liter that we have taken here. So that's why finally the molarity of NaOH solution will be 5 molar, right? So by this way, we can calculate the molarity of different solutions. Okay, so usually we are using these two important metrics. for measuring the solution concentrations. And the next one is significant figures. So here the significant figures are very much important. So these are the numbers of digits in a value that contribute the degree of accuracy of the value, right? So if you follow the significant figures rules, so that means you can get the highest accuracy. Why? Because these rules are designed to get the highest accuracy. Okay, so what are the rules of significant figures? The first rule is non-zero integers are significant, right? So here we can see, so this is the example for non-zero integers. So there is no any zero integer is there. So that's why here we can see 4 digits are there. All 4 digits, all non-zero digits are significant. So that's why in this value, so there are 4 significant figures are there. Second rule is captive zeros are significant. Captive zeros. What are captive zeros? The captive zeros which are present in between 2 non-zero integers. So here 1.6 is a non-zero integer. It is a number. And 7 is also a non-zero integer. So that's why here this 0, so which is there in between 2 numbers. So this 0 is called to be captive 0. So this captive 0 is also countable when it is there in between 2 non-zero integers. Okay, so that's why here we can have 4 significant figures in this value. It is 1.607, which is having 4 significant figures. The third rule is leading zeros are not significant. Leading zeros are not significant. Here we can have the example. So 0.0486. So in which, so these 2 zeros are called to be leading zeros. Okay. So why? Because it is there before the number. So that's why it is called leading zeros. And these leading zeros are not significant. So no need to count these zeros. So that's why these are non-significant. So that's why here we can have 3 significant figures for this value. And the fourth rule is trailing zeros are significant. So what are trailing zeros? So trailing zeros are there at the end of the number. So this is the number and these zeros are called to be trailing zeros. But here important point is there that trailing zeros are countable when there is a decimal point. If decimal point is not there, we cannot count it. So here we have a decimal point. So that's why trailing zeros are countable when there is a decimal point. So that's why when there is a trailing zero is there, so we need to check whether the value is having any decimal point or not. So here we have decimal point. So that's why the total number of significant figures present in this value is 4. So these 2 zeros are also countable. Why? Because here decimal point is there. So this is the value, so which follows all the rules. So this is the trailing zeros, so which are countable when there is a decimal point. And 5, 8, 3, these are non-zero integers. And 0 is captive zeros. So captive zeros are significant. And these zeros are called to be leading zeros. So leading zeros are not significant. So we need to follow the rules to identify the number of significant figures present in that particular number. So next one is primary and secondary standard solutions. What is primary standard solution? Here this primary standard solution, which is highly purified substance, which is almost 100% purified substance, right? It doesn't have any impurities, right? But whereas in case of secondary standard solutions, which are highly impurified, that means it is having many impurities. So that's why this is not completely purified substance, right? And due to presence of highly purified substance here in this primary standard solution, so which are less or no reactive. So why? Because impurities are not there, which are stable substances, stable compounds. Here it has very less or there is no reactivity for few compounds. But whereas in case of secondary standard solutions, which are highly reactive substances, why? Because we are using secondary standard solutions for reactions, for chemical reactions that we are performing in our lab. So that must be secondary standard solutions only. So primary standard solutions will not be reacting with other compounds. Why? Because those substances are having less reactivity. And the next one is, it is not hygroscopic. So primary substances or primary standard solutions are not hygroscopic. So when it is placed outside the lab, and it will not absorb any water molecules, right? So which is very stable compounds. It doesn't have any hygroscopic nature. But whereas in case of secondary standard solutions, so which are having somewhat hygroscopic nature, for example, NaOH, if you place the NaOH outside from the container, so after some time, so you can see that NaOH gets melting out. So when it is exposed to the air, so it gets melted out. Why? Because so it has highly hygroscopic nature, which will absorb all the moisture which is present in the atmosphere. And primary standard solutions will be only useful for standardizing purpose. So it will be standardizing the secondary standard solutions. It is not useful for the reaction purpose. It is only useful for the standardizing the secondary standard solution. Why? What is the reason? Why? Because these primary standard solutions are completely purified substances. So secondary standards will be standardized by using primary standard substances or solutions. Whereas in case of secondary standard solutions, so these are not useful for standardization purpose. Why? Because it has many impurities. But these secondary standard solutions are very much important for specific analytical experiments, for specific chemical reactions that will be performing in the chemistry labs. For example, so here HCl, NaOH. So these are the chemicals which are very much essential in our chemistry lab. Chemicals are very much important for acid-base titrations, for many other reactions. So these compounds are very much important. Why? Because these compounds are secondary standard solutions which have higher reactivity. And coming to the primary standard solutions, here the examples, NaCl, sodium chloride, so which is acting as a primary standard for AgNO3. So when we are standardizing AgNO3, why? Because AgNO3 is like a secondary standard solution. So that will be standardized by using NaCl, right? So here NaCl is acting as a primary standard substance. The next one is qualitative and quantitative analysis. And these are very much important analysis techniques in pharmaceutical industry. So why? Because we are identifying the samples and we are calculating the concentration of the samples by using these analysis techniques. So what is qualitative analysis? In qualitative analysis, so we are performing chemical analysis, which is designed to identify the compounds. This is the main important term that we need to remember, identify. So here we are identifying different components, so which are present in the mixture. Mixture is containing component A, B, and C. So we can easily identify by using qualitative analysis. Next, coming to the quantitative analysis, this qualitative analysis will be useful for identification purpose. So we are identifying the evolved gases and we are identifying the precipitates and color changes. These are all coming under qualitative analysis. For example, so if sodium bicarbonate is there in the sample solution, so it will be giving the carbon dioxide. So by releasing the carbon dioxide, that we can identify that there is a sodium bicarbonate substance is there in the sample solution. In the same way, so we can identify the soluble chlorides by the form of precipitates. For example, so soluble chloride, which is there in the sample, Cl ion, chloride ion, so which will be forming a precipitate with silver ion and forming silver chloride precipitate. So that means by observing the precipitate, So we can identify the chloride ions. So what we are identifying here? Here we are identifying the chloride ions by precipitates, right? So here these qualitative analysis, which is very much important for identification purpose. So not only for these two purposes, so we can identify the color changes, we can identify the melting points of different substances, we can identify the boiling point of different substances, etc. And the second one is called quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis. So what is quantitative analysis? In this quantitative analysis, we are quantifying the substance which is present in the sample. So that means we are simply measuring the concentration of the substance, right? So this quantitative analysis is also very much important in pharmaceutical industry. So why? Because we are quantifying, we are calculating the concentration of different substances, different dosage forms by using this quantitative analysis technique, right? So here it is classified into four important methods. The first one is chemical methods. So this is the chemical method here, and which is subdivided into three methods: volumetric method, gravimetric method, and gasometric method. What is volumetric method? The name itself indicating that volumetric. Metric means measuring. We are measuring the volume of the solution. Okay, so by this volumetric method, we are measuring the volume of titrant solution, right? So this volumetric method, which consists of many other methods such as acid-base titrations, non-aqueous titrations, redox titrations, precipitation titrations, complexometric titration, these are all coming under volumetric methods. So volumetric methods, nothing but titrations. And the second one is gravimetric method. So in this gravimetric method, we are measuring the weight of the insoluble precipitate. We are measuring the weight of the insoluble precipitate by simply heating the substance, right? So here thermogravimetric analysis so is very much important for measuring the weight of the compounds. So this gravimetric method, so which is involved in thermogravimetric analysis, right? For example, if you take DSC, differential scanning calorimetry, if you take DTA, differential thermoanalytical techniques. So in these techniques, so here this is the main important method that we are following, that is gravimetric method. That means we are simply heating the substance, or we are simply heating the precipitate, and we are evaporating the solvent which is present in that precipitate, so that we are forming a solid weight. So that weight will be calculated by using few important calculations, and finally we are measuring the percentage purity, right? And the next one is gasometric method. Here we are simply identifying the gases, evolved gases or absorbed gases by the substances, right? And the next method is electrical method. So we are analyzing the samples based on few electrical properties such as electric current, so which is measured by amperometry or polarimetry, voltage, so which is measured by potentiometry, conductivity, which is measured by conductometry, right? So these are the three important electrical properties. Based on that electrical properties, we are quantifying the sample. We are calculating the concentration of the sample. And the next one is instrumental methods. So here we can use many different types of instruments such as UV visible spectroscopy, polarimetry, refractometry, TLC, PC, HPLC, etc. But all instruments are mainly working based on physical properties of the sample. So physical properties. So what are the physical properties so that we are identifying here by using instrumental methods? For example, absorption. If the solution is having more concentration, so which gives more absorption. So more absorption will be identified by UV visible spectroscopy. If the solution or if the sample is showing a specific rotation, then that sample is identified by the polarimetry. If the sample or solution is producing refractive index, and that sample will be identified by refractometry. If the sample is producing migrations, so those migrations will be easily identified by TLC, that is thin layer chromatography or paper chromatography, right? So these are all instruments which are mainly based on the physical properties of the sample. Every sample is producing a specific physical property. Based on that physical property, so we are choosing an instrumental method. The last one is called biological or microbiological methods. So by using these methods, so we are measuring the potency of the drug. So how the drug is efficiently working, right? So by using biological or microbiological methods. So here we can use different microbiological cultures by using different bioassays. So we can identify or we can quantify the potency of the drug. So how the drug is potent, how the drug is showing the efficacy, that we can easily identify by biological or microbiological methods. So this is the flow chart. So which will be telling how the sampling is taken and how this qualitative and quantitative analysis will be performed, and finally we are giving the report. For example, if you are working as analyst, so first you need to take the sample from the company and you have to prepare the sample preparation, and based on the properties, physico-chemical properties of that particular sample, so we are choosing a specific method, sample preparation method. And after preparing the sample, sometimes the sample might be having some other components. Sometimes the sample might be having impurities. So that's why we are performing separation techniques. Sometimes we are adding reagents. And after adding of reagents and the sample is ready, now the sample is that we are using for qualitative and quantitative analysis. By qualitative analysis, we are identifying the sample, and quantitative analysis, we are calculating the concentration of the sample. Right. So here we are using different instruments. So instruments will be giving the data. So that data will be taken and that data will be interpreted. So that means we are analyzing the data. And finally, so we are giving the report according to the data. Right? So this is the flow chart which will be explaining the starting point to ending point of the entire chemical analysis method. And the next one is errors. So this is very much important topic. So errors are very much important, and here error is a difference between the true result and measured results, right? So as we have already discussed that accuracy is completely opposite to the errors, which are completely inversely proportional to the errors. So why? Because in accuracy, so we are discussing about how closeness the value to the true value. But here errors are explaining that how much difference is there between true value and measured value. It is telling about the difference. If the difference is more, then it produces more error. If difference is less, that means it is producing less error, right? And here errors are classified into two types: indeterminate errors and determinate errors. Indeterminate errors means we cannot determine it, we cannot predict it, we cannot identify it. These are all accidental errors. It comes sometimes, it might not come sometimes. But whereas in case of determinate errors, so these errors can be predictable. We can rectify it. We can identify it easily, right? Okay, so these determinate errors, these predictable errors are again four types: methodic error, personal error, instrumental error, and reagent error. So here methodic error, so which is mainly due to choosing of wrong method. So that's why we are choosing the method based on Indian pharmacopoeia. So from Indian pharmacopoeia, we are taking the method and we are considering the method that is the final method. But if you choose a method from internet sources or any other book, and that is not giving the accurate method, so it might be giving some methodic errors. Personal error. So when you join as an analyst, you should be trained. If you're not getting proper training, so definitely you'll be getting some errors. You will be giving some errors. So that errors are called to be personal errors. Instrumental errors. If you're using instrument, so which is not calibrated frequently, so that definitely will be getting some errors by those instruments. So those errors are called to be instrumental errors. So that's why periodically, so we need to calibrate the instrument. So whether the instrument is working properly or not. The next one is reagent errors. So these reagent errors are mainly due to impurities present in that reagents. Sometimes some reagents that we are using, which are already expired, so that we can definitely get the errors. But these errors are that we can easily rectify it. So we can identify the cause of these errors and we can easily rectify these errors. So that's why these errors are called to be determinate errors. And the next one is sources of errors. So these are the 10 important sources. The first one is improper sampling. So for example, I want to take anhydrous form of Na2CO3 according to the procedure, but I have taken hydrous compound instead of anhydrous compound. So that means I'm taking the wrong sample. So if you are taking the wrong sample, then definitely you'll be getting error. So that is one important source of the error. So that's why we need to follow the method perfectly. We have to recheck the method while we are performing the experiment. And the second one is error during sample preparation. Sometimes when we are preparing the sample, so we are skipping some important steps. We're not following the exact method that we have given that we get from the Indian pharmacopoeia. Sometimes some steps will be avoiding those steps. So that's why we will be getting some errors. For example, potassium permanganate. So when it is standardized, so potassium permanganate solution has to be heated up to 70 degrees centigrade. But many students are not following that. They will be heating slightly at 30 degrees or 40 degrees, and they're simply again adding the indicator and doing the titration method. So definitely they will be getting errors. And the next one is error by the analyst. So if the analyst is not having sufficient training, so definitely analyst will be doing many errors. Next one is error by equipment. So equipment must be calibrated. If not, definitely the error will be coming in the final result. Calibration error. So sometimes, so when we are performing the calibration process, so that process will be giving whether the instrument is working properly or not, whether the solution is prepared, which is giving correct values or not, that we can easily identify. But sometimes without doing any calibration process, so we are simply operating the instruments. So that's why we can definitely get the errors. And the next one is reporting error. Sometimes we are reporting the result instead of 2 microgram per ml concentration. Sometimes we are writing 2 milligram per ml concentration. Instead of microgram, so we are writing milligram. So which gives the error. So that is called reporting error. Next, calculation error. Sometimes we are doing the calculations. Sometimes we are unable to perform the few important calculations such as percentage calculations or multiplications. Okay, sometimes we are placing wrong decimal points. Due to these calculation errors, so we are getting the final result also will be getting error. And the next one is error in method selection. So choosing the correct method is important. So if you are choosing the wrong method, so that is failed method that if you are choosing, then definitely the final result will be affected. And error during transport and storage. So here this error is mainly coming from the wrong labeling. If the sample, if the solution is wrongly labeled, if the chemical is wrongly labeled, so that definitely the analyst will be getting the confusion and he will be giving the wrong values for the wrong substance that he had analyzed. So that's why labels are very much important. So we need to check the labels also. So after after formation of finished product, so while we are doing the labeling process, so we need to recheck that labels whether the label is properly placed or not. There is any ambiguity is there or not, we need to check it. So before transport or before sending to the storage. Error due to laboratory environment. If the laboratory environment is not supportive for the compound, and definitely the error will be coming. And the next one is minimization of systemic errors. So this is very much important topic in errors, minimization of systemic errors. So how can we minimize these errors? The first method is calibration of instruments, apparatus, right? So by using calibration method, so we can easily minimize the errors. For example, if you are handling different instruments such as UV visible spectroscopy, HPLC, IR, pH meter, electrical balance, these are all instruments must be calibrated before using. Why? Because if it is, we are doing many experiments on these equipments simultaneously, so that we can get, definitely we can get the errors. So that's why before using that instrument, we need to calibrate it. So what is the calibration? Calibration is the process by which we are comparing the test values. That means what we are doing, that we are comparing the test values with the standard values. So whether it is giving the standard value or not. For example, pH meter, when we are calibrating the pH meter, so we are using buffer capsules. For example, pH 7 buffer capsule that we have used. And so we are making a solution with that buffer capsule. That solution is giving pH 7, exactly pH 7. So when it is placed in the pH meter, so it will be showing around 6.88. It is not exactly showing 7, but it has to get 7 only. But it is showing 6.88. So how do you know that? So we are simply comparing it. We are comparing the 7 value. We are comparing the 6.8 value, that is test value, with the standard value. Standard value is 7. So when you are comparing test value with the standard value, that you can easily identify whether the instrument is calibrated or not. In this case, the instrument is not at calibrated. Why? Because it is giving the wrong value, that is 6.88, right? So that's why there will be a deviation is coming. So we need to correct those deviations by calibration knobs. By turning the calibration knob, we can correct those deviation so that we can calibrate that instrument. Now the instrument is ready to give the accurate values. So not only for instrument, so we are doing calibration process for many other apparatus such as pipettes, burettes, volumetric flasks, thermometers, weights. So these are all apparatus that we are using in the laboratories. So those must be calibrated. So before using, so that it will be giving the accurate values. We can get the accuracy, we can get the precision, right? So this method is very much important. The second method is called parallel control method. So here, so this parallel control method, so which will be useful for estimation of the samples by comparing with the standard substances. So here also we are comparing the sample with the standard substance. So here important thing is, so we are preparing two solutions, the sample solution as well as standard solution. These two solutions which are placed in the instrument at the same identical conditions. For example, so we need to take the same concentration of the sample as well as standard solution. Sometimes we can take the same weight of the sample, or we can take the same weight of the standard. So that means we need to have identical condition, the same conditions that we need to follow for sample as well as standard. So if you follow the same identical condition, if you place sample solution, standard solution in the instrument, then definitely we'll be getting some values, and those two values must be comparable. So by comparing those two values, so we can easily control the errors, we can easily minimize the errors. And the next one is blank determination. So blank means without sample. So here by this method, so we are analyzing the sample, we are taking the values of a test solution, so which is not having any sample. For example, so we are taking a sample NaCl. So NaCl is dissolved in water. But sometimes what happens, NaCl is the sample that we are using here, which is dissolved in water. Water might be having some impurities. So due to presence of these impurities in the water, so it will be also consuming some amount of volume of titrant solution, right? So, but impurities should not be present. So we have completely purified it, even though we are getting some impurities. So that's why, so we need to go for the blank determination. So what is the blank determination? Here, by using this blank determination, we are preparing a solution which doesn't have any sample, right? So that means we are doing this blank determination by two steps. In the first step, we are taking the sample which is dissolved in suitable solvent. Then we are making a test solution, and that solution is titrated, and we are getting around 12. The volume of titrant will be 12 ml. In the second step, so we are not adding any sample. Without adding of any sample, we are simply using the solvent that we have used in this process, in the previous process. We're simply using that previous solution, previous solvent. That solvent is to be titrated so that we can get some value. That is around 2. So what we need to do here? So we need to subtract the value of the second solution from the first solution. Why? Because the first solution will be getting the value from sample as well as solvent, but second solution will be getting the value from only solvent. So when we are subtracting the second value from the first value, then definitely we'll be getting the accurate value, right? So this is called blank determination. That means we are not using any sample in the blank determination, so that we can avoid the errors, we can minimize the errors. And the next one is cross-checking results by different methods of analysis. What is this? So here we can check the method, whether our method is correct or wrong, by using different methods. For example, HCl solution, hydrochloric acid, is estimated by acid-base titrations. Why? Because HCl is a strong acid. So which will be estimated by acid-base titration by using NaOH, which is a strong base. So we can easily estimate the HCl solution. And HCl is also estimated by another method called precipitation titration. Why? Because HCl is containing soluble chlorides. So soluble chlorides can be easily precipitated when we are adding a precipitating agent, right? So that we can get the precipitate and we can identify the soluble chlorides. That means Here, each chemical, every chemical can be identified or can be estimated by different methods, right? So we need to check all methods are correct or not. We need to check. We need to check all the methods. We need to take the values. We have to compare the values with each method. And finally, we need to conclude whether this method is giving correct or not, right? So this is called cross-checking results by different methods of analysis. And the next one is standard addition method. So what is standard addition method? Here in this method, so we are adding the standard to the sample. So when we are performing this standard addition method, so here this method will be performed when there is a small quantity of sample is there. For example, if the sample is 1%, so we have the sample that is only 1%, right? Very likely. So 10 milligram sample is or 1 milligram sample is there, right? So what we need to do now? So here now we need to add a standard to the sample solution. So that is in a different way. That means the first solution we are adding a 10% standard solution to the sample solution. In the second solution, we are adding 20% standard solution to the sample solution. In the third solution, we are adding 30% of standard solution to the sample solution, right? So that means we are gradually increasing the concentration of the standard solution. We are increasing the percentage of the standard solution. So here we can see on the screen. So this is the standard addition method. So here these 4 points are representing this is the sample along with 0% of standard solution. There is no standard solution. And this is the sample with 10% of standard A. This is a sample with 20% of standard B. And this is the sample with 30% of standard C, right? So when we are increasing the standard concentration here, percentage, so actually here we can get a linear graph. So this is called a linear graph that we can get here. So by using this linear graph, so we can minimize the errors, right? So what we are finally doing here, we are adding the standards at different percentages, right? So we are fixing the same concentration of the sample, the sample percentage will be same, that is 1% only, but here the standards that we are adding will be changing 10%, 20%, 30%. So finally we can get a linear, right? So by using this standard addition method, so we can easily control the errors. And the next one is called internal standard method. So what is internal standard method? Here we are adding internal standard. So what is internal standard? Internal standard is a standard so which has the similar properties like the sample. But when we are taking this internal standard, so here there is two important cases. There is two important conditions are there. The first condition is when the sample is lost. We lost the sample, right? And the second case is when the sample is highly expensive. Highly expensive. For example, we are performing the experiment on gold ions. These are very expensive, right? In these two conditions, we can go for internal standard. So what we are doing in internal standard method? So here internal standard is added. It is also like standard addition method, but here we are adding internal standard. So what is the difference between standard addition method and internal standard method? Standard addition method, here standard will be added. Here standard will be added 10%, 20%, 30%. So that means it is a linear standard concentrations that we are adding in standard addition method. But whereas in case of internal standard method, here we are adding internal standard, a fixed internal standard that we are adding. For example, a 5% internal standard solution will be added for 4 samples. We are having 4 samples. So for all samples, we are adding the same fixed amount of the internal standard, 5% only, right? So here the standard concentration will be fixed, the same percentage that we are adding in all the samples. But whereas in case of standard addition method, the standard that we are adding to the sample will be gradually increasing, right? So by using these two methods, so we can easily minimize the systemic errors. So these are very much important methods that we are using in the pharmaceutical industries, right? So this is about minimization of systemic errors. Next, coming to the standardization procedures of different substances. So here we have different substances. So first one is NaOH. NaOH is a strong base, so which will be standardized by using oxalic acid. So why? Because oxalic acid is a primary standard, NaOH is a secondary standard. So here the phenolphthalein indicator will be used for standardizing NaOH. So this is the standardization procedures. So we need to take the oxalic acid, that is 0.63 grams, so which is taken in conical flask, and adding the indicator and titrating with NaOH, right? So what is the endpoint here? Here we can get the, finally we can get pink color. So pink color is the endpoint. And this is the formula. By using this formula, so we can easily calculate the percentage purity of that particular NaOH. So this is XML. So here X is the volume of titrant, XML, and N calculated normality of NaOH, and N given is a standard normality of NaOH. For example, if you take 0.1 normal is NaOH of is the normality of NaOH, but when you are calculating, it is giving around 0.05 normal. So we need to place 0.05 here and 0.1 is here. And this is the equivalent factor, 0.063. So this is the equivalent factor here. So equivalent factor of NaOH is 0.063 into 100 divided by weight of the sample. So how much weight that we have taken, that we are taking here. So by using this formula, so we can easily calculate the percentage purity of NaOH, right? The next one is H2SO4. So what is H2SO4? Sulfuric acid. And the sulfuric acid is a secondary standard solution which is taken in burette. And the secondary standard solution is easily titrated with a primary standard solution. Here we are taking anhydrous Na2CO3, sodium carbonate. So which is a primary standard solution, right? So methyl orange is the indicator. The endpoint will be red color. So what is the procedure for the standardization? Initially, we need to take the Na2CO3 primary standard and add 2 drops of methyl orange, then titrate with a titrant solution, that is H2SO4, sulfuric acid. And finally, the red color will be obtained, right? And this is the equivalent factor, that is 0.09807. Right? So this equivalent factor that we can place here in this formula, so that we can calculate the percentage purity, right? The same formula will be repeated here. There is a small change that here the equivalent factor is changing here. So remaining, the formula will be same. XML, calculated normality given, weight of the sample, everything will be same, but except equivalent factor. The next one is HCl, hydrochloric acid, so which is a secondary standard solution and which will be titrated with sodium carbonate, anhydrous sodium carbonate, which is a primary standard solution. Indicator is methyl orange, and this is the standardization procedure. So here we need to take the Na2CO3 initially in the conical flask, and which is dissolved in water. Add 2 to 3 drops of methyl orange. Then the solution is ready. Now the solution is titrated with HCl solution, which is taken in burette. So finally, the endpoint will be coming, right? So these are the endpoints. The equivalent factor of HCl is so 0.05299. And this equivalent factor which will be placed in here in this formula, so that we can calculate the percentage purity of HCl solution, right? And the next one is ferric ammonium sulfate. Ferric ammonium sulfate. And here the ferric ammonium sulfate is titrated with arsenic trioxide, which is a primary standard solution. Ferric ammonium sulfate is a secondary standard solution, right? So indicator is ferroin solution and osmic acid. This is the indicator that we are using. And here the color change will be yellow color. So finally we can get the yellow color solution. Here the arsenic trioxide, which is taken in conical flask. This is the primary standard solution, and which is dissolved in NaOH solution. Why? Because NaOH is giving the basic nature. So arsenic trioxide is usually dissolved in NaOH. So after dissolving the arsenic trioxide, then we are adding 100 ml of water, and we are adding H2SO4. And this is very much important. Why? Because H2SO4 is providing acidic medium. Why? Because oxidation reduction titrations or redox titrations will be performed under acidic medium. So that's why this is very much important point. We need to add 30 ml of diluted H2SO4. Then finally, we need to add the indicators and titrate with ferric ammonium sulfate, which is taken in burette. And finally, we can get the pink color. So pink color will be changing to the pale blue color. This is the end point. And the equivalent factor will be 0.0044946 grams. And this equivalent factor will be taken here for calculating the percentage purities. And the final two compounds will be potassium permanganate and sodium thiosulfate. So potassium permanganate is a self-indicator, and it is also a secondary standard solution. So it will be taken in burette as a titrant solution. Here the primary standard solution will be oxalic acid, which is taken in conical flask as a titrate. So this is the standardization procedure. So initially we need to take the oxalic acid in conical flask and dissolve in H2SO4 solution at 70 degrees centigrade, and titrate the solution with KMnO4, potassium permanganate, which is the secondary standard solution. And finally, so we can get the pink color. So pink color will be representing that the reaction is end. Okay, and this important thing is the pink color has to be retained. So sometimes the pink color will be disappeared. So we need to check so whether the pink color is retained or not. And this is the equivalent factor 0.00252, and it will be which will be substituted here in this formula and finally calculating the percentage purity. And the final compound is sodium thiosulfate, Na2S2O3. So here Na2S2O3 is a secondary standard solution which is taken in burette as titrant, and which will be titrating with a primary standard solution, that is potassium iodate. So which is taken in conical flask. So this is the reaction that will be occurred in between these two compounds, potassium iodate and sodium thiosulfate. So here in this reaction, iodine will be liberated. So liberated iodine will be titrating with sodium thiosulfate. So that's why this is a type of iodometry. In iodometry, iodine will be liberated. We are not adding iodine directly. So iodine will be liberated from the reaction. So here the starch is the indicator here. The final endpoint is blue color. So this is the standardization procedure. Initially, we need to take the potassium iodate, that is primary standard in conical flask, and add potassium iodide. What is the purpose of adding potassium iodide? To release the iodine molecules. And add 5 ml of diluted H2SO4. Why? Because we are maintaining acidic medium. So this is also coming under redox titrations. All redox titrations are performing under acidic medium. And here we are adding 2 to 3 drops of starch indicator, and finally titrating with sodium thiosulfate. Right? So this is the end point, that is blue color will be disappeared. Initially the blue color will be getting, why? Because we are using the starch indicator. When we are adding starch indicator, initially we can get blue color. but after the endpoint, the blue color get disappeared. And this is the equivalent factor, that is 0.0107 grams of potassium iodate, and which will be substituted here in this formula. And finally, we can calculate the percentage purity, right? So this is about the first unit that we have completed.